Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
The Apache was shot down. Welcome to the Tuesday edition. As President Trump announces on social media, the U.S. Army helicopter that went down near the Strait of Hormuz last night was in fact downed by Iran. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington with breaking news today. Markets turned sharply lower, Kailey, right before that announcement was made.
Yeah, it was already a down day being led by technology, semiconductors in particular getting hit hard. But clearly that risk-off sentiment is just being fueled further by the president's post. Not just that Iran shot down this helicopter, the two pilots of which we should note were successfully rescued, but that President Trump says the U.S. of necessity must respond to this attack. It will now become a question of what exactly that response looks like, and if it is in nature escalatory or attempts to be de-escalatory response.
And exactly at this point, how we qualify a ceasefire, as it's been referred to now, weeks in the making, even though we have been shooting at each other periodically throughout that time. The president has not spoken publicly outside of this post. Kailey, he did speak with reporters last evening saying the crew of two, as you mentioned, were fine. But you wonder if he will address the nation on this, if in fact we are going to resume kinetic action.
Yeah, of course. It's just after he told reporters in the early hours after the Knicks game in New York that he thought that this could be resolved in 2 to 3 days in terms of reaching a deal. He said that we're in the final throes, but is this event potentially something that could disrupt that process? We'll get the very latest from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in just a moment. But as Joe mentioned, this is market-moving news. That the president is driving now. So let's get a check on those markets as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Indeed, certainly these heightened tensions in the Middle East rattling markets. Let's get right to the numbers here because we got a big move to the downside with the S&P down 1.7% right now, down 123. We're trading just off session lows. Dow Industrials down 400 on the Dow, drop there of 0.8%. But it was a down day before we got these latest headlines. As Kailey mentioned, a lot of weakness in semiconductor stocks. NASDAQ down 2.9% now. The NASDAQ 100 index down 3.2%. All of this with the VIX right around 22 now, was above 23. The SOX selling off. That's the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. Right now that is down by 7%. The 10-year 4.53% with the 2-year currently yielding 4.13%. The 30-year 5.01%. Gold is down 1.7%, 42.55 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude pairing earlier declines. WTI 87.93 a barrel, down now by 3.7%. Barrel of Brent right now 91.54, drop there of 2.9%. Our Nora Melinda will have a whole lot more on the markets for you coming up in just a moment. So again, recapping here, we've got the VIX just above 22, the SOX selling off down 7%. All of this as President Trump says the U.S. must respond to Iran's attack on an American helicopter, and that is dimming hopes for an end to the conflict. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Yes, the losses were pre-existing, but they did deepen just in advance of and after President Trump's post saying that the U.S. must retaliate against, or respond rather, to the attack, as he describes it, Iranians shooting down an American Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, this casts some doubt that already may have been pre-existing as well as to whether or not negotiations between the U.S. and Iran can prove successful. The president himself, when speaking to the press pool, traveling back from the Knicks game from New York to D.C. last night, still seemed optimistic about the prospects for a diplomatic breakthrough in the near term. This is how he characterized it.
We have ongoing negotiations with Iran that hasn't stopped. We're in the final throes of what will be a very, very good deal that will not allow in any way, shape, or form nuclear weapons, etc. And the strait will open up right away. It'll open up immediately upon signing, which could be in 2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days, the final throes of a very good deal. We wonder how that has changed now. Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall has made her way from the White House back to our bureau here in Washington with this breaking story. Tyler, it's great to have you with us. Is this ceasefire ending now with this news, or do we not know?
There's really a lot of pressing questions. That is definitely one of them, how the administration is going to view this attack by Iran against one of our helicopters. Thankfully, the two pilots are safe. I will point out that over the weekend, President Trump was pressed on what would be the red line in order to end the ceasefire. He was asked directly about if Americans were killed. He said, yes, that would contribute to his decision. But he said that his other red line is whether or not he felt that he could make a deal or make a deal fast enough. And that gives us a little bit more insight into how the administration has been viewing the flare-up in fighting that we have seen since the ceasefire began, because the White House has made it absolutely clear that they want to prioritize diplomacy as that viable option. And as we just heard from the president, he did say that progress was being made, but this could derail those efforts, because just over the weekend, we saw the worst flare-up in fighting since the ceasefire was announced, when we saw that kinetic action between Iran and Israel. The next question, of course, is what does the U.S. response look like? And does the U.S. go after military targets, which has seemed to be the preferred course of action for the Trump administration? Or do we see an escalation when it comes to maybe targeting infrastructure or energy sites? I will quickly point out, in that exchange of strikes between Israel and Iran over the weekend, Israel did hit a petrochemical facility in Iran, which was considered to be a rather big strike when we are talking about the range of options that could be in front of the U.S.
Well, we're just getting a headline crossing from Axios, Tyler. Barak Ravid reporting, citing a U.S. official, that the investigation determined that an Iranian drone hit the U.S. helicopter and got it to crash. But that U.S. official said the investigation still has not determined if it was intentional or not. And I would imagine that the U.S. would calibrate its response based on whether or not it was intentional.
Yeah, I think that's probably right for us to assume. Interesting that President Trump, though, came out, I guess, ahead of this report and without providing the fuller details, because it does seem that the U.S. does want to make it clear that we are going to respond in some regard to what would seem like an escalation regardless of intent. It raises questions on exactly how this happened and how service members were put at risk. But again, thankfully, it doesn't seem like it had escalated to that level, and they're safe.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall responding to this breaking news with us. Thank you so much. And of course, we'll see if we hear more from President Trump about this. Right now, it's all closed events on his schedule for the day. But obviously, his written words, if not spoken words, do have the power to move markets, as we've seen repeatedly, and we saw once again in this scenario. So for more on the market action, we turn to Bloomberg TV markets correspondent Nora Melinda, who's joining us from New York. So Nora, clearly we saw stocks falling to session lows. We're just off them now. How much of this can we attribute to expectation of and the president's post itself regarding Iran, and how much is this just, once again, a pretty painful rotation out of some technology stocks?
Well, we've been seeing the market lurching from headline to headline to headline. Of course, we know that the market was essentially thinking that we may see some easing of tension. So when you see headlines like this coming through, you're going to see the market reacting in a substantial way. You see the NASDAQ 100 earlier dropping as much as 4.1% in the session. As we know, this is just coming off of just last week. On Friday, the NASDAQ 100 seeing its worst day since Liberation Day of last year. So we're seeing a bit of a rotation, a sharp rotation out of tech. And what I find to be particularly interesting is that if you take a look under the hood of the S&P 500 right now, about 300 stocks are still in the green. So it really just talks and explains to you how heavy the concentration of tech names is when we think about leadership in the market. It's so heavily concentrated in these tech names that when you see some sort of pullback on their end, it actually affects the entire market. So we're still seeing some strength as people try to rely on some of the more economically sensitive sectors as we're really pulling away from tech.
Well, it's a great point that you're making here. And to see us pulling off the lows like this, Nora, I don't know if it's even possible to qualify these moves in real time. But this headline that the Apache may have been downed unintentionally or accidentally somehow by this Iranian drone, is that seeming to lift some spirits in the market?
Well, it's interesting. I'm taking a look at kind of the breakdown right now. We know that, of course, tech in the S&P 500, as I'm pulling up SPX Index IMAP, we see that tech is the worst performing sector. But the bright spots that I do want to call out for you, real estate, utilities, consumer staples. We know that real estate is what people always think about rates really being tied and impacting a name like real estate. So the fact that we're still seeing this in the green, it shows you that the market is essentially being decisive about which names they actually want to pull out of. And you're really seeing growth stocks seeing the brunt of the damage here. And especially as we just think about the broader leadership in the market, as I was laying out before, what my sources have been telling me is the fact that, you know, maybe this was expected. Maybe we need a little bit of a correction, especially as we think about some sort of broadening out of great returns outside of just tech.
Yeah. Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's markets correspondent Nora Melinda live from World Headquarters in Manhattan. We thank you. Romaine's going to have a doozy of a market to review on the late edition of Balance of Power, but that's nothing new. In fact, Romaine brings us a very important conversation right now against the backdrop of this market. Romaine Bostick at the Mizuho Tech Conference underway right now in New York with the CEO of IBM. This is live on Bloomberg. Romaine, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. I am here with the CEO of IBM, Arvind Krishna, here at the Mizuho Technology Conference in Lower Manhattan. Great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here with you, Romaine.
Obviously, all the talk is about AI. We talk about digital AI. We talk about biological AI, physical AI. Everyone's already looking around the corner, including you, to quantum, which, of course, many people think is going to be the next big thing, something that IBM has been working on for years. 2 years ago, you laid out a relatively ambitious target that we would actually see quantum advantage using IBM hardware by the end of 2026. We're halfway through the year. Are we going to get that?
Absolutely. If I look at what some of our partners like the Cleveland Clinic are getting done, what the national labs like Oak Ridge are getting done, I can already see the early signs of what they're getting, the progress they've made.
When we talk about what that progress could mean, not only for the world of business and finance, but as an application through our society, is healthcare the first place that gets it?
I think that materials or maybe simple molecules are the very first place, maybe magnetic materials as alternates for some of these things that are very hard to get. I'll use the word rare as a bit of a pun over there. I think lubricants to maybe get more effective energy, maybe better EV batteries, and then small molecule drugs are there in the first set. But I also want to be equally excited about what we could do about modeling weather perhaps, or modeling flows to improve how chemical plants work, maybe aerodynamics to improve how vehicles and airplanes work. These are really, really exciting use cases for us.
I am curious, though. I mean, when we talk about actually starting to see some sort of proof of life on quantum advantage this year, your own head of research has said that that process might be a little bit more elongated. Is there a disconnect between your ambitions and what he's seen from the scientific perspective?
No. So I'll take an example of what's happening on molecule properties. So last summer, June of 25, we could maybe understand a 5-atom molecule. You'd react with, that's not very exciting. You could do that on a piece of paper if you're smart enough.
Okay, I'm not smart enough, but I trust you, yeah.
Last November, that team could do 300-atom molecule. Okay, you'll say that's great progress, 5 to 300, but you could probably do that on a normal supercomputer. So, okay, that's not quantum advantage. This April, they did 12,000 atoms. They did a half of a protein called trypsin. I think they're on their way to about 30,000 atoms already. So 5 to 300, same amount of time, 300 to 12,000. One more month, 12 to 28,000. It gives you the rate of improvement, some of it from the hardware, some of it in algorithmic techniques that people are learning of what can work. By the way, at this size, you can't actually do it any other way.
Okay, well, we talk about the commitment that you made to this. You've invested or committed to invest about $10 billion in this, which I assume is the tip of the iceberg. You got some pretty big backing from the federal government, giving you $1 billion. Not that you need it, but certainly a vote of confidence. When you start to see the government getting involved, obviously you have a lot of, I guess, quasi-competitors in this space also getting involved. Does that accelerate this pace?
That's what I believe the government investment is for. So if you look at it, it's not so big that it's controlling everything. However, it's a sign of endorsement, and it is a signal of them wanting to get speed, meaning, IBM, you were going to do this. If we commit to do this, will you do it faster? Will you open it up to everybody else so it's open to the ecosystem? And we said yes, because we actually believe an ecosystem is important. And if government investment gets us there a year or 2 or 3 before we might otherwise, both of those are worth it. And that is what is important about that.
The $1 billion investment from the Trump administration is specifically to build up a chip foundry, if you will, a quantum chip foundry.
A quantum foundry
yeah.
that we have committed will be open to all comers that are acceptable to the United States. So the 36 odd companies that are here, we are happy to give them our best technology, the same as we use for ourselves at that level.
Right.
That they all get access to.
And you say all comers as to what's been approved. This is the idea that this is about furthering the U.S.'s aims to make sure that they have an advantage with regards to what gets made, and I would presume so that it doesn't get in the hands of the countries that we don't want it to have.
Well, I think that is easy. I mean, like, there have always been restrictions on advanced technologies that you cannot sell it or provide it to certain places. I think that is fine. But in a new area, it's really important to be first, both for the economic competitiveness long term, but also for national security. I think for those 2 reasons, it's imperative that we get there first.
Do you think the U.S. will be there first?
On quantum, absolutely.
You're not concerned about some of the reports that we've heard about some of the progress that we've already seen in China?
I'm paid to be paranoid, so I wouldn't say I'm not concerned.
Yeah.
However, from everything I can see, I think we are ahead. Are we ahead by a decade? Probably not. But are we ahead by a couple of years? That would be my guess.
I do want to talk about just AI in general. At your Think conference last month, you talked a lot about this idea of the progress companies are making with regards to the deployment of AI, and more importantly, some of the progress they aren't making. You've talked about this idea, or IBM has certainly talked about this idea of the limited ROI that we've seen so far. You say that the companies that are getting this right aren't necessarily the ones that are just deploying more models, but they're finding ways to take the models that they already have and use them better. Explain that.
I'll give you an example. So you can certainly improve productivity of individuals. We'll call that productivity apps. That's where both economists and CFOs get very concerned. But where's my bottom line on that? Is it leading to less expense or more revenue? Where is that? And that's hard to find. But let me give you a second example, and you'll say, okay, I can see that. We are pretty acquisitive. Anybody who does M&A, you often bring the entity in, and actually normally your profits might decrease for the first year or 2 until you take all of the cost and get the cost synergy. Using AI tools now, we can probably add 10 points of profit synergy on day 1, because the amount of time it used to take to move contracts over, to do all of the sales automation, to do all of the revenue forecasting, all of that now using AI can be shrunk down to literally a few weeks. If you can do that, I can now take that 10%, I'm not saying it's 90%, but 10%, and invest it instead in marketing and R&D and innovation to drive the revenue growth even higher. That's an example of what I mean by use the AI to really fundamentally change how you do business. It's got to become part of your operating model of the company.
Are you taking that medicine yourself internally?
We are. In the last acquisition we did, we actually managed to take out about 60% of the G&A on day 1.
What's the message, though, that you have, not only for your partners, but also internally for your own workforce with regards to how this actually not only helps, but maybe the idea that maybe it requires a smaller headcount?
It's not necessarily going to be a smaller headcount. So a lot of people talk about this. So let me give you an example. On college hires, we tripled our hiring in 2026 compared to 2025.
Okay.
Is the
for entry-level positions?
For entry-level positions, tripled. Absolute number, tripled. So you look at me and say, why? Because my belief is if these tools make people who are coming in out of college more productive, quicker, that means we are going to be advantaged by having more capacity to build things at a cheaper cost point, which means we can go get market share. Will the shape of the workforce change? Absolutely. But I think there will be more people in the value-driving functions, be it R&D, be it sales, be it marketing, and the creative activities. And some of what I would call classic back office will decrease because you don't need so much there. So the shape of the workforce changes. Total employment is not decreasing.
I want to talk about security. Obviously, we know the potential opportunities when it comes to AI, quantum, and everything in between. You've invested so far, a commitment of about $5 billion towards something called Project Lightwell. The idea that it gives your partners a little bit more visibility about flaws in that sort of AI chain, if you will, for my sort of uninformed framing of it. But talk about why that's necessary, and more importantly, is $5 billion going to be enough?
It's hard to tell whether any amount is enough here. I think, look, this is like asking why are cyber criminals existing, and the old Willie Sutton joke was, well, I rob banks because that's where the money is. Well, if your money is inside the cyber infrastructure, they're going to come. Our investment in Lightwell, I think a lot of people can point out the problems and point out vulnerabilities. Our investment in Lightwell is actually about fixing them. So we are saying that not just open source that we are good at, but if you have open source and the source code is known, we can use these same tools that are used to find vulnerabilities to also create the fix and give it back to the community. That is really what Lightwell is about. Of course, in order to do that, you need cooperation around where people are finding things, how critical are they, where are they in the critical infrastructure. So that is the whole project. But it's actually about us coming up with an antidote, not just the problem.
This, I can just tell by looking at your face, this is probably an exciting time for you. IBM is obviously a storied company when it comes to computing, and we are clearly at the inflection point of something new, maybe something better. You've gotten a big bump in your stock price, largely because of at least the government backing or at least the government support. Is there a sense here, when we talk about the potential for an acceleration in revenue growth, the widening of profit margins, that is something that is imminent, or is that something still long-term?
Well, depends on what you call long-term. I kind of liken what we're doing on quantum and cyber to where GPUs were in 2015, 2016. And each era of technology tends to go faster. So if I say QPUs plus cyber is going to go fast, I think in the next 2-3 years, we're going to see incredible returns coming from these technologies into our numbers. And with those ambitions, you have the capital you need in order to do that? Any plans to maybe go to the market to look for a little bit more? We go to the markets all the time. We are always in the debt markets, and so far our debt investors have been very confident in us, and we get great rates there. We could maybe dip into other markets, but I think for what I'm pointing out over the next 5 years, I think we have the capital and we got the wherewithal inside. Arvind, really appreciate you joining us. My pleasure. That's Arvind Krishna. He is the CEO of IBM. Back to you in Washington, Joe.
All right. Romain Bostic, thank you so much. Joined by Arvind Krishna at the Mizuho Tech Conference in Lower Manhattan. A fascinating conversation, and hearing from him there the idea of the U.S. government endorsing IBM, not controlling it through its own financial interests here and wanting to get up to speed, as Arvind Krishna described it. Obviously, we're seeing IBM stock down a little bit today. That is broadly true for technology stocks, semiconductors in particular getting hit hard, though risk sentiment overall has taken a bit of a hit in the aftermath of President Trump saying that the U.S. must respond to the attack and the downing of an American Apache helicopter by Iran. So let's get more on today's market action as we check back in with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
I thank you very much indeed. Let's get right to the numbers. He gave us the perfect setup. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all very much in the red, looking at an 83-point drop right now. Yes, off-session lows on the S&P right now at 73.24. That is a drop of 1.1%. Dow Industrials down 202 points on the Dow, a decline of 0.4%. NASDAQ right now down 525 points, a drop there of 2%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 2.3%. We are seeing weakness in semiconductor names. Indeed, the SOX, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Stock Index, down now by 4.7%. After moving above 23, the VIX now at 21. The 10-year, 4.53%. The 2-year, 4.12%. The 30-year, 5.01%. Gold is down 1.5%, $42.66 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude at $87.34 a barrel. WTI does remain lower, down 4.3%. Barrel of Brent just below 91 right now, down 3.5%. So bottom line here, fresh wave of selling sweeping through global equity markets as an escalation in the Middle East collides with mounting anxiety over tech names. Again, recapping here, NASDAQ 100 index down 2.4%, the SOX down 4.9%, and the VIX just above 21. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcast. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much, giving us what we know to the minute in financial markets. What we know here in Washington, meantime, is a few things for sure. One being that an Apache helicopter went down near the Strait of Hormuz. The 2 pilots were injured and rescued by a drone boat. We also know, based on President Trump, that Iran was responsible for that downing, and that President Trump's view is that the U.S. must respond to that attack. What we don't know is what that response will look like and how escalatory in nature it will be, and that may be informed by the other thing we don't know, which is whether or not this was actually an intentional attack. As Axios reported just a few minutes ago, Joe, that the U.S. investigation has not yet determined whether or not that Iran intended to do this.
It's true. Knowing that the President of the United States just late yesterday was talking about a peace deal being signed in the next 2 to 3 days. So there's some pretty big questions on how all of these storylines meet, with the New York Times now reporting that the U.S. believes Iran will settle on 15 years of suspension to enrich uranium, knowing that the United States had demanded at least 20 years. And when we started talking about duration, this really gave the markets a lift weeks ago, knowing that if we had gotten to this point, that a deal would be likely. We're simply working out the timelines, and it appears that we are back to that, or at least some parties are, with the U.S. demanding for months that Iran agree to conduct no enrichment for at least 20 years. The Iranians countered by offering 10. American officials believe they will settle for 15 years. But the added layer of this Apache helicopter being shot down really complicates things. And we're glad to have a couple of moments with Mick Mulvaney. It's been a while since we've spent some time with the former acting White House chief of staff from President Trump's first term, co-founder of the Freedom Caucus when he was a congressman, former OMB director, former acting CFPB director. Mick, it's great to have you back as part of our conversation. Give us a sense of how the shooting down of this Apache helicopter, while still being investigated, might change the contours of this peace deal.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's sort of been the strangest ceasefire I think any of us have experienced in a long time, sort of the hottest ceasefire I remember in recent memory. But that's always the risk, right? When you've got a ceasefire that's not really a ceasefire, what are the chances of escalation, whether or not it's intentional escalation or unintentional? You just don't know. So look, the fact that we're talking about 10 years versus 15 years versus 20 years, that's a really good sign towards getting a deal. Why? Because I used to tell President Trump, you know, when you're down to just arguing about the price of something, you're going to get a deal done. So it sounds like they're speaking each other's language, at least in terms of the number of years, if that's the case. But could things get out of hand? Yeah. Look, the bottom line is this. I don't think anybody believes the president anymore when he says it's 2 days, it's 3 days, it's 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks. It's just, I think they see what he's doing, which is he's trying to build momentum and build optimism, but they can't take that literally. Keep in mind, you take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally. And I don't think we're 2 or 3 days away from anything. So we'll see where that goes.
Well, so how are the Iranians supposed to take the president, Mick?
Yeah.
Doesn't he need to be a credible, believable negotiator?
Oh, no, he's absolutely credible. Keep in mind, the big thing about making threats, of course, is if they are credible. And any threat that the Americans make, especially to use military power, is absolutely 100% credible. The threats to use economic weaponry, sanctions, and so forth is absolutely credible. So when I say it's not 2 or 3 days, I don't think the Iranians care if it's 2 or 3 days. They see what's happening on the ground. They know who they are talking to. Actions are speaking louder than words there. I'm talking about the domestic audience back home, the markets and so forth. If the markets are listening to him literally and thinking, oh my goodness, we'll have a deal. You know, how long ago has it been, Kailey, since he gave the national press address? It was going to be 2 to 3 weeks. This war will be over. Has that been 6 weeks ago?
Yeah.
So look,
That was early April, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just at some point you have to have the actions back things up. It sounds like there is some progress, so that's good. But I don't take a 2 to 3 day timeline literally at all.
CNN counted the number of times the president has indicated we're on the verge of a deal like this. It was 37 in what is now a conflict lasting just over 100 days. Mick, when you read down the president's truth post about the Apache being shot down, he said, nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. What would be proportionate in your view?
Yeah, something minor. A lot of it depends, Joe, on where they really are with the negotiations. If Trump thinks that they are really close to getting a deal, and I'm not just talking about saying that we are, but if he's actually getting the feedback that there's a close to getting a deal, I think you might see a relatively minor sort of response. if, however, there really isn't anything happening happening now in discussions, and we've sort of reached this stasis, this status quo, where Iran is waiting for Trump to give in and Trump is waiting for Iran to give in. By the way, I think they're both mistaken about how long the other side can hold out. Trump thinks they're going to give up economically. They aren't. They think he's going to give up politically because of the midterms. He's not. So something has to change that balance. So if they're not close at the table right now, then I think you might see a larger retaliation. So let's watch for the scope. Okay. And again, actions speaking louder than words. That'll tell us a lot about where they were in the discussions.
You raised the notion, Mick, of the president giving in, and as we consider whether or not he'll give in on domestic issues, like, for example, the anti-weaponization fund that at least the DOJ had to renounce last week in order to get reconciliation through the Senate, do you expect he's going to have to give in on the director of national intelligence and tap someone else for that on a permanent basis other than Bill Pulte, knowing that Bill Pulte's tapping is what could lead FISA Section 702 to going dark after the deadline on Friday?
Yeah, and I can't remember what senator it was who was talking last week when Pulte was named to the acting position, that there's actually statutory requirements now as to the qualifications for the permanent director. Again, acting is different than permanent. My guess is that Pulte can't be the permanent ODNI, the Office Director of National Intelligence, just because, number one, I'm not sure he meets the statutory requirements. Number two, the atmosphere right now in Washington towards that particular position is fairly poisonous. So I'm not sure Trump wanted him permanently anyway, but if he did, there's plenty of good other people out there within his organization that could fill that particular role. So yeah, but I don't think Pulte gets the gig permanently.
You were ahead of your time, Mick Mulvaney, as acting chief of staff. You helped to create the path for a lot of members of the cabinet here. So what does the president do? Speaker Mike Johnson was at the White House reportedly earlier today to try to talk this out. Does the president name a permanent pick that might help lawmakers accept the idea of an acting Bill Pulte?
It does. I think it absolutely does. It also helps with FISA, the FISA renewal, which is really what this is about, right? I mean, the president, I don't think really, he doesn't get up in the middle of the day asking himself, who's going to be OD&I, but the FISA thing is a big deal. He's hearing about that from Congress a lot more than he's hearing about, whether or not this person or that person is a good permanent OD&I. So, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of pressure on him to sort of compromise, give a name that the Hill is okay with, use that as a way to get FISA approved. I think FISA ultimately does get approved simply because it does have bipartisan support on the Hill. So I think that gets approved, but I do think the president's going to have to name a different OD&I director to get that job done.
Well, I guess we'll see if it's able to be approved ahead of the Friday deadline. We're also waiting to see, Mick, if the House is going to be able to pass the budget reconciliation bill to fund ICE and CBP today. They've been dealing with a lot of attendance issues. I think it was 37 members of the House missed votes yesterday. It's obviously primary day in a number of states. Is that math too difficult for House leadership to risk it today?
Probably today, yeah. I mean, I'm from South Carolina. I'm not there today, obviously, but we've got a primary today. There's a primary in Maine. Listen, if you're a sitting member of Congress and you've watched over the course of the last several years, this goes all the way back to Eric Cantor losing in 2000, and I think it was 12. What's the common thread of people who lost their primaries unexpectedly was that they were in Washington on the day of the primary. I think Joe Crowley lost to AOC when he was in Washington as well. So you are going to be home for your primary day, whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican. To your point, Kailey, yeah, it creates a math problem for the Republicans, but it also creates a math problem for Democrats. So it's a multivariable equation. You might know who of your members are going to show up or not show up, but you're not going to know who the other team is bringing onto the field. So it could be a while before they've got sort of confidence levels of who's going to show up on any given day.
House votes on reconciliation today. Mick, the speaker, seems to think he's got the votes, but there has been some heartburn. Well, there's been some heartburn about this anti-weaponization fund. Do you think this is dead, as Todd Blanche indicated? Every time the president's asked, he seems to bring it back to life.
No, I don't think it's dead. Look, and I'm not going to rehash here January 6th. I have some very strong feelings about it, as you know. But I think the issue may have been more with how the money was going to be paid out than the money, and who the president was going to put on this board to make these decisions. And I think there may be a compromise available here to get that done. They're not going to give it to him the way that he wanted it originally. Blanche, I think, look, if Todd Blanche goes back on that word now under Senate, he'll probably end up being impeached, just because you can't tell the Senate XYZ and then immediately go back on your word. They would make the accusation you were lying to them under oath, which is a serious problem. So no, I don't think they can go back to the fund the exact same way that it was, but there might be some tweaks that make it a little bit more palatable to everybody.
Of course, might be tougher for Todd Blanche to get confirmed to be Attorney General, as the president officially nominated him yesterday. Mick, just quickly, you mentioned you're a South Carolina native. It is primary day. Do you have a call on how the gubernatorial race on the Republican side is likely to shake out?
No, and it's absolutely fascinating. I've not seen a race like this in a long time, where you've got 5 people all within 4 or 5 points of each other, which is fascinating. But the one thing we do know is this, is that Donald Trump endorsed the sitting lieutenant governor. She's doing okay, but she's not running away with it. In fact, there's a chance she doesn't finish in the top 2. Only the top 2 will move on tonight after the primary. So it's a rare occasion, Kailey, a rare occasion of Trump endorsing somebody who wasn't sort of really on the arc to winning anyway. This was a fairly deep sort of endorsement for him. She was in the pack. So we'll see how she does tonight. There's a chance she comes out on top. There's also a chance she doesn't finish in the top 2, which would be a stunning blow to the president.
Yeah, and would 2 blows a pattern make after Randy Feenstra in Iowa? I guess we'll see. Exactly. Mick Mulvaney, the former acting White House chief of staff in the first Trump administration and former congressman from South Carolina. Thanks for being here on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks well off session lows. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. President Trump says the U.S. must respond after blaming Iran for shooting down an American military helicopter off Oman. The president's comments came hours after his claim that an agreement to halt the fighting was close, despite a renewed outbreak of fighting between Israel and Iran. S&P 500 index now stands at 73.36, again to underscore well-off session lows, but still down 0.9%. We're looking at a loss now of 67 points. The Dow is down 75, a decline there of 0.1%. Tech, though, where the real damage is being done. We've got NASDAQ now down 1.8%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 2.1%. All of this with the stocks down 4.3% right now, and the VIX just above 20. The VIX last hour was as high as just above 23. 10-year 4.52%, the 2-year 4.12%, and the 30-year 5.00%. Gold down 1.5%. Spot gold now at $42.64 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 3.4%. $88.19 a barrel. Barrel of Brent right now, $91.60. Brent is down 2.8%. Bitcoin, meanwhile, at $61,700, down another 2.7%. The automaker Stellantis is recalling more than 1 million Jeep vehicles in the U.S. over an electrical issue that could result in a fire, saying that owners should park outside and away from other cars until the problem is fixed. Stellantis shares down now by 1.1%. Recapping, stocks are trading lower. The SOX down 4.1%. S&P down 0.9. The NASDAQ 100 index now down by 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, we're going through something together today. It looks like the dip buyers are busy. We are way off our lows of the session, prompted by news from Iran, more specifically from the President of the United States, who made it clear after the lunch hour today that the Apache helicopter that went down near the Strait of Hormuz late yesterday was in fact shot down by Iran. Markets plummeted on that news. The NASDAQ was down over 4% at one point, now down less than 2%. And we are still seeing weakness broadly through tech, but there is less selling pressure and maybe some dip buying that's going on right now. We're going to get to our panel in just a moment. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are hanging in there a bit later with us as we bring Becca Wasser back into our conversation. She leads our defense analysis and the defense team at Bloomberg Economics and has been instrumental in our coverage here of what's happening in Iran. Pretty remarkable, Kailey, to consider that this helicopter was shot down and we don't know if it was intentional.
Yeah, Axios reporting, citing a U.S. official, that intentional or not is still unknown here, Becca. So how does that calibrate the the response the U.S. might select from the available options. What are those available options, and where do they rank from incredibly escalatory to not so?
I mean, as far as things go, it's a political decision right now how to strike back and how intense to strike back. And my read is that President Trump still wants to reach some type of, deal, some type of negotiation with Iran, and is going to probably calibrate the response. That said, as you've noted, we don't have all the information. So I think what we are most likely to see is a measured response in the way that we have for the reported self-defense strikes that U.S. Central Command has been carrying out on Iran. Those have been hits on clear military targets, so various things like radar systems and communications nodes. Obviously, there are more escalatory options. There's attacks on energy infrastructure. There's the most escalatory option, which would be attacks on leadership. But I don't think we're quite there, even without having all the information. Axios reporting that it was most likely a drone that crashed into and shot down this Apache. And, it probably was something that could have been either an accident, although frankly, it's very hard to envision in the airspace that it would be an accident given sort of the size and scope. But, there's also a chance that it was purposeful. But there's a bigger question about who ordered this. Right now, Iran's military is incredibly decentralized. Trump himself has noted that there are some communications issues within leadership, and that also goes down to the very, very lowest levels of the military. So this could essentially be a rogue actor at play.
Fascinating. Just to get back to what you said, and I think you just answered this. If in fact it was a drone that took down the helicopter, as Axios reports, and we're allowing for that to be unintentional, does that indicate how much stuff Iran is throwing into the air at one time that we could inadvertently be crashing into it?
I mean, that could be the case. You don't know exactly the flight patterns, and some drones are essentially pre-programmed to do a specific flight pattern. Okay. But we've also seen in places like Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the way that drones could be scoping out an area and, if they identify a target, can veer toward that target in a kamikaze style and try and bring it down. So it could be technology that's more akin to that. Right now, we just don't know, and we don't have the available information.
Well, really something. Becca, thank you so much. Becca Wasser from Bloomberg Economics as we assemble our political panel to talk about this and more. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick is a partner at Stonecourt Capital and our Republican strategist for our panel today. What are you thinking here, Jeanne? If this turns out to have been inadvertent somehow, or a rogue actor sent a drone up into the sky, Donald Trump has been pretty clear that he's averse to resuming heavy military activity, that going back to war with Iran is something he would prefer to avoid, constantly talking about a peace deal that could be only days away. Is that enough, if this was inadvertent or chalked up to a rogue actor, that the president can move on and continue talks?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that he does not retaliate in some fashion. And we know the U.S. military has a list of targets. And since this seems to have been the result of a drone hit, potentially they hit some of those drone and missile launch sites near the Strait of Hormuz. And that would be sort of a proportional response to avoid the escalation. One thing that we should just mention is there have been some criticisms that during this sort of fake or so-called ceasefire that's not really a ceasefire, Iran has been able to use the time to increase its drone production, making all of this much more dangerous, as we've seen today, for the U.S. military, which then raises the specter. After this, does Donald Trump make a decision about finishing this thing or retreating? Because this middle ground that we're on now, a ceasefire that's not a ceasefire, talks that don't seem to be going very far, is potentially just endangering the U.S. military, the United States, and the world economy. So I think that's some of the pressure the president is going to find himself on, trying to walk this line as he's been doing for the last couple months.
Well, so it raises the question as to whether or not the president can win here, Rick, not just in the sense of winning the war, but in terms of decision making is something like this response. On the one hand, I would imagine you have the likes of Senator Lindsey Graham who want to see a strong response. On the other, if you respond too strongly, you may open up even more room for your opponents to this war, saying that this is not a ceasefire, that the War Powers Act needs to be held here, that he needs to come to Congress. And I just wonder how you think he calibrates his decisions around perception, or whether he does it at all.
Yeah, there's really nothing new here. I mean, there's a host of hawkish senators who've been suggesting that the only way to actually bring Iran to a serious negotiation around their nuclear material is to hit them hard and hit them often. And at only that time would the despotic regime that's currently in place be willing to cry uncle and sign a deal. And so they're out there with that kind of heat. And so this just exasperates it, right? This gives them fuel for their fire. And at the same time, the president is juggling the need to open up the Strait of Hormuz and lower those gas prices so that he can survive a little bit in the midterms on a cost of living issue that's dogged him since he was elected. And in the meantime, there is a legitimate negotiation evidently going on, and he's trying to cut the best deal he can to win. Look, at the end of the day, he's going to define a win in whatever way he thinks, he can actually get an agreement from Iran. And then it's up to everybody else to define whether or not they agree with that. And we are a long way from knowing where all that's going to shut down. I mean, the one thing that everyone uniformly says is the negotiation that is vexing Donald Trump right now is standard operating procedure for every president in the last 50 years. And the one thing Iran may know how to do is negotiate. They may not know how to fight a war or run a country, but they've got this part down.
Hey, Jeanne, we've got 4 states voting in primary elections today, and we're always told that people don't vote on geopolitics, realizing it's geopolitics that have created a more severe affordability issue for a lot of voters. Is it different this time, and that Republicans might feel the weight of voters' decisions based on the trajectory of this war?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, you're exactly right. We don't usually see foreign issues, foreign entanglements, unless we have troops on the ground really playing into certainly primaries or even general elections. But in this case, we do see a direct connection in the minds of many people who are voting in these primaries, that they are paying the price for this war of choice by the president. And so they are seeing it in gas prices, grocery prices, and the rest. And that's why, as we look to the big race today in Maine and Graham Platner, you hear him up in Bar Harbor the other day talking about, as he has been consistently, about the billionaires, about the affordability crisis, about what these foreign entanglements for him as a veteran, somebody who served many tours, what these foreign entanglements that he says Susan Collins, which she did voted for, have meant for the people of Maine. So I think it is playing a bigger role than it might otherwise because of the impact on affordability.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you mentioned, the incumbent Senator Susan Collins of Maine, she obviously looks likely to go up against Graham Platner, assuming that he is able to win the Democratic primary in that state today. That is still the assumption, despite what is frankly a laundry list now of scandals that have plagued him, including former Reddit posts that he made years ago in the aftermath of his deployments that have now already worked their way into ads being put out by a Collins-backed group. Let's just have a taste here of what's already circulating on the airwaves.
Graham Platner blamed women for getting raped. Who says something like that?
Platner said women should take some responsibility for themselves.
He's an awful person.
Graham Platner is dangerous.
I would never vote for Graham Platner.
And we should note, Rick, that Platner has apologized regarding his former Reddit posts. He said, quote, "For those of you who have read these things and been offended, I have read these things and seen someone that you don't recognize. I am deeply sorry." He says, "When I got back from Afghanistan in 2011, I stayed in the Army for another year. I got out in 2012. Some of the worst comments I made, the things that I think are least defensible, that I wouldn't even try to defend, come from that time." So he says he's not going to try to defend them, but is he going to be able to defend himself against this and the other allegations around his behavior in romantic relationships as he advances toward the general election?
Yeah, this attack on his personal characteristics is really tough. These are all women, Mainers, folks who know Platner, and that is a hard thing to dodge. That's not some historical thing that he did a long time ago and has learned his lesson. These are women who are currently familiar with him and really have waged a heavy indictment on his character. I mean, his own political director authored a Washington Post editorial op-ed today, really just hammering him. I mean, this is not someone who he has recovered from over the years, and this is someone who helped actually run his campaign and left it and did a blistering attack on him in print. So I don't think this is something he can escape with a throwaway line, but it's going to be a really tough year for Republicans. And Maine is a classic example, where, even though Susan Collins is a tried and true Mainer with 40 years of experience in the Senate and a powerful chairman of the Appropriations Committee, she's going to have trouble because the current is flowing against Republicans in the entire country. And nowhere is this being seen the most than in the consequential race here in Maine. We'll know whether or not the Senate's going Democratic or not if Susan Collins wins or loses, early in the day in the first Tuesday in November.
Well, that underscores how Maine is a must-win seat for Democrats if they want to flip the Senate. If you need 4, Maine very likely has to be in that, because if you can't win Maine, can you get Alaska or Ohio?
Exactly.
Or Iowa, perhaps. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, the both of them. Thank you so much for joining us on this primary day. And of course, we'll have more coverage at 5 p.m.
You said it. We'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio.